Record. Okay, let's let these folks in. Thanks, y'all.
Good morning, everyone.
Hello, hello.
Welcome, welcome.
Good morning.
Hi, folks.
Thank you all for joining us on a Monday morning. The first Monday morning of June.
Yes.
Amazing. I think we are all in. I'm sure others will join. But hello, welcome. We're going to get started. Thank you so much for joining us today. I want to welcome you to today's Art New York share out about the CDF Impact Report with our partners at Dance NYC, Raquel and Carrie Blake. My name is Danielle King. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the Director of Program Strategy and Engagement at Art New York. Visual description, I am a white woman with olive skin and brown hair pulled back. I'm wearing a light brown sweater, and I am in front of a wall with some colorful kid art, my kids' art. So as we gather, we always begin Art New York events by offering a land acknowledgement. We would like to take this time to acknowledge that wherever we are currently located on Turtle Island, otherwise known as North America, we are on occupied territory. Art New York's membership in the 5 boroughs of New York City operates on the unceded ancestral land of the Lenape, Wappinger, Canarsie, Rockaway, and Matinecock communities. We want to honor and celebrate all of these Indigenous communities, their elders past and present, as well as future generations. We also want to take this time to acknowledge that after there was stolen land, there were stolen people. We want to honor the generations of displaced and enslaved people that built and continue to build the country that we occupy today. And since we are gathered in virtual space today, let's also take a moment to consider the legacies of colonization embedded within the technologies, structures, and ways of thinking we use every day. We are using equipment and high-speed internet not available in many Indigenous communities. Even the technologies that are central to much of the art we make leave significant carbon footprints, contributing to changing climate that disproportionately affects Indigenous peoples worldwide. We invite you to join us in acknowledging all of this, as well as our shared responsibility to make good of this time and for each of us to consider our roles in reconciliation, decolonization, anti-racism, and allyship. The second part of that land acknowledgement was written by Adrienne Wong of Spiderweb Show in Ontario, Canada. So some additional notes before we begin. We have Programs Manager Nikki Maggio is here with us in the Zoom. They are off camera. They can assist with any technical issues you encounter today. You can message them directly if you need something. We have captioning enabled. You can access that captioning by clicking the closed captioning button in your Zoom menu and clicking Show Subtitles. We are also currently recording this session. We will take questions at the end, so we'll have a Q&A, but we will stop recording before that portion. During the Q&A section, you'll be able to come off mic to ask questions, or you can also put your questions in the chat, and Nikki will help facilitate getting those questions asked and answered. And then finally, the report that we're going to be talking about today is not yet available, but will be published on June 11th, so stay tuned. After June 11th, it'll be available to all of you through the Art New York and Dance NYC websites. So now I'm very happy to pass it over to Talia Corin, our Executive Director of Art New York.
Thank you, Danielle, and thank you, Nikki, for all of your support. And hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Talia Corin. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Executive Director at Art New York. For a visual description, I am a white woman with curly shoulder-length brown hair. I'm wearing a cream and pink floral blouse, and I am in a notably beige room, a notably boring background. But I'm very grateful to be here with you all, and so grateful to my partners in this conversation, Raquel and Carrie. Carrie, do you want to go next?
Sure. My name is Carrie Blake. Hello, everyone. I am a research and planning consultant in the arts, and I do a lot of work in support of art service organizations. My pronouns are she, her. I am a disabled white woman with long blonde hair, blunt bangs, dark glasses, wearing a light green button-down shirt, also in a notably beige room with blurred hues behind me. I'll pass it to Raquel.
Hola, my name is Raquel Dutois, and I go by she, they, and I am the executive director of Dance NYC. And as far as my visual description, I am a sassy Latina. I have short brownish hair. I have a slight sunburnt from the summer days of yesterday, and I'm wearing hoop earrings and a mesh blue and white shirt. And I don't know, my background. Because I don't have actually my scene, but I think it's kind of blurred and it's in my kitchen. So
Hey, well, thanks everyone. So as Danielle said, the report on the FY26 CDF Impact Survey is coming to you soon. And one of the reasons why it's a little bit held up is because we made a decision as a collective to add on an additional layer of analysis. This is the fourth year that Dance NYC and Art New York and Carrie have partnered on an analysis of the data that many of you all shared with us. And it felt like an important moment, both with a new administration and also because 4 years of data is actually sort of a lot, right? Like we are different people than we were in 2022. Our organizations look different. The city looks different. The cultural needs of our sector in some ways look different and in some ways have been remarkably the same, right? So it felt like a really valuable opportunity for us to take a moment and take a step back and think some about what we have learned kind of more cumulatively over this experiment. And so I'm just going to provide a little bit of background of like, why did Art New York and Dance NYC start doing this? What was the impetus behind this project? And then we'll share a little bit more about what we've learned, how it's evolved, and where we think both this work will go. But I think more importantly, perhaps a vision for what it can look like for the city, not just the DCLA, but I think starting with the CDF program within the DCLA can have perhaps a more relational engagement with nonprofits instead of a transactional relationship with the sector. And so I think, if there's like a big dream, that's one of the big dreams, is how can we move from this very transactional sort of prove it model into something that reflects the richness and value and diversity and also economic, health, education, and like meaning making values that the cultural sector brings to living in New York City. Okay, that's some of where we started. Some of you were there, some of you were not. In November of 2022, I had just gotten a job offer from Art New York. That was the most important thing. No, it was not. But it was in the first week of me collaborating with Risa that award letters arrived for the FY23 CDF, which is the Cultural Development Fund, just if we're playing alphabet soup. DCLA, Department of Cultural Affairs, CDF, Cultural Development Fund. Those award letters went out, and it was the first year of funding after the DCLA had implemented some pretty significant internal adjustments. Some of the things were really, I think, universally positive in that they increased the floor of giving to $10,000 from $5,000, which meant that some of the smallest and most grassroots organizations doubled their award size overnight. This is very positive. There was a real focus on expanding first-time grantees. And also, there were some disruptions that created a lot of anxiety, fear, and I think destabilization at a time when there was already a lot of destabilization coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic and shutdown. They lowered the ceiling on grants as well, and also had new budget bands, which were correlated to your org budget at that time from the middle of the pandemic, which for a lot of organizations was not reflective of the way that they work, the constituents that they serve, their staff size and their needs. And so there was, the proverbial phones were ringing off the hook. And I think as service organizations, both Dance NYC and Art New York were like, we have to figure out what's happening. And in order to do that, we have to just know what is happening. And the best way we could figure out how to do that was to send out a survey. And so fortunately, thanks to the long relationship that Carrie had with Dance NYC, we had a researcher who could dive into this project really from the very beginning. But within, I think, 10 days of those award letters going out, we had started sending out a survey. And I think there were a lot of really kind of top line trends in that first year. One, it was the first year that the awards and therefore then the distributions happened so late in the calendar year. For many organizations that operate on a July to June fiscal year, folks were getting notifications almost halfway through their fiscal year that their budgeted support from the DCLA was going to be wildly different than what their award letter showed. And then obviously we know that there have been real challenges of getting paid before late in the fiscal year, which places an undue burden on especially the smallest organizations who have to front basically the cost of service delivery and staff support before they get funding from the city. So I think some of those trends around just like how late it happened in the calendar year, as well as people were just totally unprepared for this, right? I think people, for better or for worse, there was no sense among the broader community that this was something that they should be anticipating. And I think that it's one of the challenges that we've continued to see since then. Nobody knows what to put in their budget for their DCLA award. And it feels very difficult for private funding to be more stable than public funding, right? Like, I think it feels kind of topsy-turvy in terms of what we can expect. And so I think, we have continued to administer this survey because no one else is doing it. And not because it's perfect, and not because we would like to be the experts on DCLA distribution, but because we feel that the field deserves it. You all deserve to understand where your support fits within a broader schema of distribution. And also it feels like, as an advocacy tool, we have to be able to reflect the impacts of these choices as it occurs on the artists, the administrators, the workers, the audience members that rely on city funding. And so some of those challenges around timing and inconsistency, and I think just a general sense of like, do we know what is happening, have continued. And also, I think that there are potentially positive signs around like some more stability. And I think also an opportunity with a new administration to have a different kind of conversation about what is possible. So that was sort of my long preamble about how we started and why we still do this survey. If you want to jump in, Raquel.
Also, let's just say why should there not be a level of transparency and accountability around how our public dollars are being allocated?
Right. Yes. That also times 100. I think that there's there is, in fact, even a law that the Department of Cultural Affairs publish and report on the distribution of funds across demographic, neighborhood, geography, and discipline that they haven't done. And so this is us doing it backwards, right? They have all of the information, and I think there are many who want to share that, but I think in lieu of that, we're going to keep doing this because at least it's something.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's so true. And just like as a caveat and full transparency, I started as the new executive director in January, right when everyone was coming together to launch this survey. And so I was previously affected by this because I would see it as a grant writer, as like a grant administrator. So I really did see the impact just in different landscapes all over New York City of this, of how the CDF impacts, right? Small orgs to even the larger of the orgs. So also, wanted to say though that one of the things about the survey, what has shifted over the initial survey year to now is there's been a little bit more of an expansive of the survey to reflect other elements of the CDF application. We keep trying to reduce it. Like we were in a meeting in January and we were just like, okay, where are these things? Blah, blah, blah. Like how can we make it simpler? But honestly, because we want to, compare it to what CDF is applying and their applications, we need to keep it in the same lines. Also, I would just want to note that several of the respondents have also become CIGs from the initial time of the survey, and so therefore no longer receive the CDF support, which is, a shout out to folks. And then another thing is that what we noticed is, survey fatigue. I mean, who wants to send out another survey? However, this time around, it was really exciting. We have a new administration. I think we were able to ramp up energies to do this survey, but it does there is survey fatigue, like we don't want to, we are small orgs, even small to or large orgs, we don't have the capacity all the time to answer all these surveys. And but I just want to make note of that as we review some of the data. Also, I just want to say that most significantly, things each year feel like we're responding to different needs and different circumstances, right? So we had like COVID, and then we had, we're coming back and opening up, Manhattan, and then we're here now with a new art administration. And so I feel like sometimes that shifts the questions that we are asking. And we're also asking for the data itself, like when we're investigating and looking at it through different eyes and different lens. So yeah, I think that is my little preview on the survey and what has changed between now and then. And I'm going to pass it on to Carrie.
Great. So I'm going to give you a lot of numbers in the next little bit, and we don't have slides with sort of talking points on them because we really wanted to stay in conversation with you. So you may want to take some notes or whatnot, but you also can look forward to the full report coming June 11. I just sort of want to talk a little bit about who we heard from this year, and we will talk in a minute about the 4-year sort of picture and trend and how things have changed. But this year we had 199, so essentially 200 responses. And we think that they represented about 14% of the applicant pool for CDF funds. This is great. We're really happy with this result because it's much larger than, not much larger, but we have had an increasing trend over the 4 years in terms of number of respondents. So in previous years, we think we heard from 11 to 12% of the pool, and this year we heard from 14% of the applicant pool. Perhaps not surprising, our pool is majority performing arts organizations, followed by arts service and arts education, and then a few presenting folks. And the makeup of the folks that we're hearing from is pretty consistent year over year as well. Although we are hearing now from more museums and galleries. We had a few more museums and galleries this year than we have in the past. We really have we would love to have a representative sample of the applicant pool. Obviously, Art New York and Dance NYC are going to lean more theater and dance, wouldn't it be great? It would be great to have the full data, but wouldn't it be great to have the full picture in terms of having a truly representative pool? We have tried to partner with other folks, which is why I think we're seeing increased respondents in some of the other disciplines. So in terms of discipline, our respondents are 36% theater and 18% dance. We did have more organizations this year, but the distribution was very similar in terms of type and discipline as in previous years. And then in terms of budget for the folks we heard from, if you think of it in terms of quarters, more or less, about a quarter have budgets of less than 250,000. Most organizations, but it's really just 29%. The majority of our folks have budgets between 250,000 and $1 million. Another 21% have budgets between $1 million and $2.5 million. And then 22% have budgets over $2.5 million. And then again, this breakdown is pretty consistent year over year. So that's sort of who we heard from this year relative to the last years. We feel pretty confident that, our pool is staying the same, so we can look at this trend kind of effectively year over year to see what it's saying to us. But again, we never know, and we'll talk later on, but we never know how representative it truly is because we don't have the full picture from DCLA.
And I think that that particular challenge of we have the relationships and the trust that we have, there is like a real asymmetry and I think compounded lack of trust of organizations being asked to provide data when either they have already done it, right? Like all of the organizations who fill out our survey have already given basically the exact same data to the DCLA in terms of what they do, how they operate, what their leadership is. And so being asked for it again, I think puts organizations in a low trust position. And also I think it emphasizes the asymmetry, right? That it's like there is a lot of data that already exists. And what our vision would be is for that data to be shared back, not just with the organizations themselves, but to Carrie's point, like with all New Yorkers. What an incredible resource it would be to be able to celebrate, highlight, and showcase the range of organizations, the assets that exist in every single neighborhood across the 5 boroughs, and also to have that be a real cause for celebration across the field instead of people feeling like, am I the only one who got in? I think when we can't see, we tell stories, right? Like when we don't know what's happening, we make up a story about it. And usually it's a story that doesn't offer a lot of opportunity, right? Collectively, when we're thinking about either like where are there opportunities for mutuality, where are there opportunities for partnerships that we might not have known before, but also where could we see and experience more of a sense of like we are all in a collective, we are deeply reliant on one another. Our artists and our audiences are permeable across all of these boundaries. And the more that we can do as a sector to feel invested in one another and feel like this isn't a sort of like, if you take these $17 from Queens to give them to the Bronx, what does that do, right? And it shouldn't feel that way in order for us to move forward. And obviously, that's not what equity wants to look like, right? Like that's, if we're moving towards a more equitable model of distribution, that's not going to get us there. And so I think we have been both in the challenge of like, we can only show who responds to us, which means that in and of itself is skewed. But what we're trying to say is like, any skewed story about this is going to leave a lot of holes. And as Carrie said, like, we can't guess. Like, we think that this is a significant increase against the full applicant pool, but because we don't know, we just don't know. And I think that is kind of the perpetual, like, what is that? The like snake eating its tail Ouroboros thing that we live in with this project every year.
We do. I don't know. I've been alluding to it, right? I say that I hate that we have to do this, right? But also, we are looking for stories. We want to know, the DCLA changed their process, right, in the name of being more equitable, but is it more equitable? We don't know. And so, we as a team look for stories and the information that we're receiving, but that isn't necessarily true to what we're seeing. We don't know if it's true or not. So it's very tricky, but I think we're supposed to talk more about that later. I'm sorry.
Yes, no, I think I jumped the gun because I was just, I was sort of excited by what you were saying.
Yeah. No. Yeah. But do you want me to sort of talk now more about what we learned?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Let's do it.
So first I'm going to talk about sort of what we heard this time around, and then we'll talk a little bit about what we've been seeing over the 4 years. Even as we've been talking now, I'm like, well, maybe we should run this number. But this year we heard, I told you a little bit about the who we heard from, but what did they say, right? They said 63% reported increases in DCLA funding for this year. 24% reported decreases, 10% no change, and 3% were first-time recipients. 5% did not receive an award. So 63% is I'll talk about in a minute, but it's a higher proportion of folks reporting increases than we've seen in the 4 years. About 50% of organizations overall in the pool have BIPOC leadership. And that proportion is consistent among those receiving increases or decreases. So there was no sort of disproportionate response in terms of identity of leadership. Of the 63% of folks that reported increases, 29% had received a decrease the year prior. So about a third of them last year had a decrease, but this year they did better. They reported getting more funding from DCLA. Let's talk about multi-year and single year. So those on continuing, 56% received a continuing multi-year award, 28% received a new multi-year award, and 16% received a single year award. Those on continuing multi-year awards received more funding on average than those receiving new multi-year awards or single year awards. Most of the folks we heard from did receive baseline and panel awards. So the average baseline award size for a new multi-year was $54,000 as compared to $61,000 for continuation of a multi-year and $44,000 for a single year. Those on continuing multi-year awards received more funding on average than those on newer single year award types, right? So when I say that, some of the detail behind it is 56% received a continuing multi-year award, 28% a new multi-year award, and 16% a single award. The data also suggested that disproportionate level of art service organizations received decreases. This is something we've tried to look at year over year because we have heard that ASOs are having more trouble under DCLA's new guidelines and award procedures and review. And again, this year it seemed our sample is sort of small in terms of ASOs, but the data we do have suggests that more art service organizations received decreases. So 24% of the entire pool reported decreases. I said a few minutes ago, 31% of ASOs received decreases. So there's a variance there between the 24% of the whole pool and the 31% of ASOs. Of the 8 disciplines that are represented in our data set, dance is the only one where a higher proportion of organizations received decreases or eliminated funding. So it wasn't a huge proportion, but because dance was the only one that had that higher number receiving decreases, it does stand out. This year's data also sort of reinforce that our smallest organizations rely most heavily on CEDF funds. So award sizes increase with budget size. There's a very clear trend there. But in FY26, the larger the budget range, the higher proportion of organizations receiving decreases. So our smallest organizations are getting the least amount of money, but it represents a higher proportion of their operating budget because they're the small guys. And then in terms of geography, in FY24 and FY25, our data showed disproportionate levels of organizations receiving decreases in the outer boroughs. It seems a little bit better in FY26. Only the Queens is somewhat disproportionate, and it's not that terrible. Also, this year's group, they generally report being negatively impacted by the CDF application and the award process, but in particular, the smallest organizations. So 62% of those with budgets of less than $250,000 were impacted somewhat or very negatively by the timing of the award, as compared to 40% of the total pool, which is a big variance. But that said, I feel like, it's only fair to say that it seems like the recent timing shifts made by DCLA seem to have helped, because we're hearing because fewer organizations report being negatively impacted this year over last year. And we do feel like some of these continued changes that they're talking about will address some of these challenges and make the process perhaps a little easier on organizations moving forward. That's what I want to share about this year. And then I can talk about the 4 year. Should I just move into that, or do we want to?
Yeah, I think that's great. Yeah.
So over the 4 years for which we've been collecting the data, more organizations have reported increased CDF awards and fewer are reporting decreases. So the first year when we started this, and actually I didn't write the survey the first year, I think there was like a lot of like grassroots, oh my gosh, we have to collect information. Yeah. And then I got pulled in to try to help understand it. And so then the next year we tried to be more consistent with like what we were asking for. But it's interesting to see that after that first year, when there was a lot of drama, and we had a lot of folks report decreases or eliminated funding, which is what sort of inspired this whole effort, that we have seen a very clear upward trend in terms of the number or proportion of organizations reporting increases year over year. This may be due to multi-year awards. We don't have enough information to know that for sure. Also, very consistently over the year over year, it's always seems to have been 3 to 4% of responding organizations are first-time recipients. So it's the same. It's a very small proportion that are getting CDF awards for the first time, but it is a consistent level of our pool. Over the 4 years, the total funds received by survey respondents has nearly doubled. So what I mean by that is we add up the total amount of funds that our survey respondents are reporting that they have been awarded. And we include all CDF funds, but we don't include city council member allocations within that. In FY23, the total amount of funding that was reported by our pool was 5.7 million. In FY26, it was 10.9 million. So that's a huge jump over a 4-year period. When we've tried to look at it different ways, how it's broken down. And when we break it down each year by where the organizations are headquartered, not where they offer programming, but where they are located, the distribution is pretty consistent, with 6 to 7% going to the Bronx, 15 to 20. There's been a higher proportion this year in Brooklyn, but 15 to 20% generally over the 4-year period going to Brooklyn, 68 to 70% going to Manhattan-based organizations, and then 5 to 6% going to Queens-based organizations. The 3 years prior to this year, 2 to 3% went to Staten Island. We didn't hear from any Staten Island orgs this year, unfortunately. And then one last thing about the 4-year period. The average total award size has increased by 22% between FY23 and FY26. So it's grown from about $52,000 in FY23 to $63,000 in FY26. When we look at the average award by borough, it really varies widely. And I assume that's based on the pool. But I'm always trying to pull us up, like, why was it this way? Why was it this way out of the numbers? And it's really hard to do that without making some gross assumptions and not knowing more about how their internal process works. The distribution by borough has also remained relatively consistent in terms of average award, but the exception is Brooklyn, which is, I already mentioned this, is receiving 3 to 4% more of the pool in FY26. But generally, in terms of overall distribution by borough, it's looking very similar. And then in terms of average award, that's where it gets a little bumpier, but it's hard to know why. And we can only assume that it's based on the, who's applying and what their programs are and the content and all that detail.
Thank you, Carrie. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's it. That's what I got.
Yeah, thank you so much. And also for those at home who were both like trying to follow the bouncing ball and also be like, what does it mean? Welcome.
Yes.
We don't know what it means. And I think that that's one of the things that we brought you all here together to say, we don't know what it means. And that is, I think, like a deeply frustrating thing. And I think to the point that Carrie was making about sort of like, every year we try to be like, maybe this year will be the year that it makes sense. And I think part of what is difficult is that we aren't looking at the full pool. We are skewed in the ways that we are skewed. And also I think that anytime we're trying to create a correlation or a causation between data points, it's hard to know what the strategic objectives are that we're working backwards from, right? And so I think we sometimes find ourselves in this position of trying to retrofit a logic that we're like, well, it could be this. And obviously, that's not a very good use of anyone's creativity. But I think that coming from the place of like, we do want there to be a cohesive narrative, and certainly New York City as a city, but also as residents and as contributors to the creative economy, we deserve to have a logic that we can follow and then also hold ourselves and the sector accountable to. And so I think that those are why we have kind of continuously come back to these things around transparency, around recognizing the like vast diversity that exists within the CDF pool, diversity based on discipline type, org budget size, kind of organization, staffing models, audience models. There are so many ways that this pool, if you're thinking about over 1,200 applicants, that is an incredibly varied ecosystem. And the CDF as a program, I think it's a challenging question to solve of how do you build a process that gives organizations what they need, which is consistent year over year general operating support, so that we can retain staff, so that we can engage teaching artists, so that we can build relationships with our communities, so that we can keep people employed and involved and engaged. How to do that across so many different kinds of organizations and different kinds of metrics around what success looks like is, I think, a really tough order for the DCLA. And also it feels like starting with some clarity and transparency around what the core objectives are and what they themselves are seeing in the data would go so far. So I want to also give like a shout out to, I think there has been sort of like a whole burgeoning movement around this kind of data advocacy. And, Art New York and Dance NYC are certainly not the only ones. And so I think it's important to acknowledge like there are lots of people, I think, beating the drum around improved transparency and reporting and helping us see what the objectives are, because certainly like an average award size increasing by 22% over 4 years, that's meaningful. And I think if as a sector we felt like that matched what it feels like, we might feel differently about the relationship that we have with the sector. And so I think that there's some amount of like cognitive dissonance that we are trying to solve with this survey, and sometimes we only make it worse for ourselves in
I
terms
do
of
think
trying to
that,
parse what is true.
sorry, Talia, can I just, oh,
Yeah.
good point. So I think one important thing that I want to reinforce is that like over the 4 years, we thought we saw positive change in FY25 for smaller budget organizations, because it seemed like less money was going to the larger organizations and more was going to smaller. And this year that reversed. So, and I didn't sort of highlight that, but that's one of our big takeaways. Again, not knowing if that's true for the total pool, but for our respondent pool, where we were seeing larger organizations this year getting more funds as opposed to last year. And we sort of continue, to your point, to be worried about the smaller orgs. So yeah, I just wish we had the full picture, right?
Yeah, totally. I feel like I have not been the best DJ in terms of keeping us on our outline. And I do feel like we have gotten through a lot of the things that we wanted to share. But Raquel, before we open it up to questions, are there things that you wanted to make sure that we highlight or wanted to revisit?
No, not really. I think that another component of this is we were talking about the museums and larger institutions, and what I found interesting, because I did come from the museum background and the visual side of a lot of these institutions, was the hesitance, like being hesitant to actually complete the survey. And so I just wanted to bring that up, and also here as full transparency was that kind of pushback about like not fully either have the people did not have actual permissions to fill out the surveys, as well as they were wondering why, DCLA wasn't doing it, which I responded, well, I don't know either, and this is why we're doing it, right?
Yeah.
So I think that that was just another, kind of interesting kind of component of that. And other than that, it's kind of like, well, where do we take it from here is really where I'm kind of thinking about. And
Yeah.
what else can we do? And I think that that kind of leads us to like opening it up to the group. So
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Raquel. Definitely, I think that that gets back to sort of that like trust has to be earned around sharing information. And also, I think because it can be difficult to know, like, why did our award change, or did we do something wrong? Like, I think there is a lot of anxiety that we hope that perhaps your data reflected amongst a group can help you understand, like, it probably had nothing to do with how you wrote your application or what was the perceived value of your work. But I think it can be really difficult to feel like, well, we don't want to cause waves, or we don't want to cause a growing rift, but it is important to talk about it. But yeah, I think we appreciate being in dialogue about this. I think, as you can see, we don't feel that we have a tidy narrative to give you all, which is why it feels great to be in conversation and to know that this is like context and information that will continue to spread and inform the way that we all move through our advocacy and organizing work. And that's ongoing. But I think for now, we can turn off the recording and open it up to questions.